Alpha.
Hi, I'm Mark Baber. I'm the Technical Marketing Manager here in the UK and Ireland for Sony's Photo Channel. Now, we've managed to team up with my colleague and good friend Sam Pilling, Technical Product Manager, because he's managed to get hold of the new Sony Alpha A1. I can see him nodding there. Yeah, Sam, great to see you. Thanks very much for getting hold of the camera and talking to us.
Hi Mark, thanks for having me. It's a shame we can't do this in person.
No, you're absolutely right. It's such a shame we can't actually meet face to face. But I really thank you for taking the opportunity to talk to us and the audience here that are watching around the new Alpha, Sony Alpha A1. I'm really jealous you've managed to get your hands on it, but not me. But in safe hands, what's it like? Tell us.
Well, one can mean a whole range of things. I don't want to be too philosophical about it, but it's the beginning of things, as it is for us with this brand new product. And it's also one camera that could replace several other cameras. It's a fantastic video camera. It's an incredible stills camera. It's one camera that can achieve such a level of professional photography that it's probably the one camera that you need in your camera bag.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's so many things about this camera that we probably won't be able to cover in the time that we've got together. But you know, what's going to make people excited about this camera? What really? I mean, I know there's 50 million pixels, a new sensor, 8K video, and of course taking and inheriting the video format from the A7S Mark III. What other kind of things are we going to be looking forward to the A1?
You're right, Mark. There's loads of things about this camera which are just completely new. So 30 frames per second stills is an absolute first. And it means you're going to capture every single split second. So if you're sports, wildlife photographers, they're going to absolutely love it. 8K video, that's a first for the Alpha range of cameras. It means that you can use 8K video and then crop down to 4K if you want to. You can shoot 8K whilst recording 1080p proxies, so your workflow's nice and easy. And of course, the 4K video gets an upgrade to 120p, so it's an absolute all-rounder.
So of course, the A1 is a completely new camera concept, maybe. I'm not sure, but of course, we've got other cameras in the range, such as the A7S for sensitivity, A7R resolution, our all-rounder, the A7 III, and of course the A9 for speed. Where does this kind of sit then?
Well, if you're the sort of customer that's currently shooting with two camera bodies, and there are plenty of those that exist, maybe you've got an A9 or an A9 Mark II for sports and you're using an A7S Mark III for video, this one unit will achieve an awful lot, if not more, of those features that you're getting from two separate camera bodies.
So we talked about 50.1 megapixels. So obviously this is high resolution. It's not as high as, say, the A7R Mark IV. But I suppose how does this work? Dynamic range, that kind of stuff. So, you know, how have we managed to get 50 million pixels into this camera with, you know, amazing speed?
Yes, you're right. It's really high resolution. And it's incredible we can capture 50 megapixels at 30 frames per second, and that's due to a combination of Sony technologies. It's not just that fantastic stacked Exmor RS sensor, it's our Bions XR processor as well. Bions XR processors are about 8 times faster than a standard Bions X processor, so it just means you get the performance out of this camera which is totally unique to Sony. It's a Sony-made sensor, it's a Sony-made processor. And there's lots of other complicated technology like the LSIs that go into this, which just make it a totally unique package.
That's superb. I don't want to get too technical too soon, but the 30 frames per second on the A1, is that compatible with all Sony lenses?
Yes, that's a really good point, Mark. There are some lenses which 30 frames per second isn't possible with, but the good news is All of the G Masters, with one exception which I'll come back to, can shoot at 30 frames per second, and plenty of other lenses as well. The only exception is the 85mm f1.4. But if you've got great G Master glass, then you're going to enjoy fantastic 30 frames per second shooting.
Okay, so that's really interesting to know with most of our lenses. What about for those consumers that are looking to, say, maybe switch from DSLR to mirrorless and maybe have an adapter, third-party lenses, that kind of stuff? Does it apply to that as well?
We can't guarantee the performance of competitor lenses. We'd obviously recommend you always go with some great native glass to make sure you get the best possible experience.
So clearly going forward, going native in our system is the preferred way if you want to get the best of all of our technology, especially with the A1. Okay, great. So my understanding is it's a brand new sensor. It's not something that we've used from other models. Sometimes we take obviously certain sensors and kind of use different processors. So is this new in the A1?
Yes, that's right. And the sensor is absolutely incredible. Obviously, it needs to be to shoot 30 frames per second. But in addition to shooting 30 frames per second, it's also refreshing the auto exposure and the autofocus 120 times every single second. And that's whether you're shooting at 30 frames per second, 20 frames per second, 10 frames per second, 5 frames per second. It just means that that autofocus is incredibly fast, and of course the auto exposure as well.
Okay, so we know a lot of professionals use A9, A9 Mark II for a variety of reasons, but I know that feedback from consumers has been that the video functions haven't been as obviously as good as, say, the A7R, 3, 4, and now obviously the A7S3. Has that been addressed now in the A1?
Yes, it does. The A1 can shoot in log and gamut, and also cinetone, which is something you may be familiar with from our FX6. It's an incredible video camera. So in addition to your 8K video, you've got 4K video at 120 or 60p if you want to shoot higher frame rates. It's an absolute all-rounder.
Okay, great. So continuing with video, question is around, is it 10-bit 422 like the A7S Mark III that we released?
Yep, that's completely right. It's 10-bit for video and it's 16-bit for shooting raw stills.
So this is going to really appeal to sports photographers, news, wildlife, that kind of thing. So looking for speed. I mean, what's it going to actually be like for those people that are watching this thinking, you know, this is going to fit their workflow for speed and accuracy, etc.?
It's literally as good as it sounds. It's still completely blackout-free shooting, so what you see is what you get through the viewfinder. And it's worth mentioning the viewfinder as well. This is our best ever viewfinder. If you've used an A7S Mark III, you'll be used to our high-resolution, larger OLED viewfinder, but this is our first one that can refresh at 240 frames per second. So if you're panning, if you're following a moving subject, it's never been easier.
Now, of course, for sports, wildlife, image stabilisation is obviously important, especially if you're going to be hand-holding things, especially at sports and in wildlife as well. So what's the image stabilisation like? And how many steps have we got in there that's going to obviously benefit photographers' workflow?
Yep, you enjoy 5.5 steps of image stabilization built into the body, and if you're shooting in video, you can also use our active mode, which with 4K video means you can almost shoot gimbal free in a wide variety of situations without worrying about wobbling your camera around.
So having this fast readout speed of the sensor combined with the processor, which, you know, I've got to admit is incredible, again, how we've managed to push the technology even further. This news about syncing with flash. So now you're able to use electronic flash as well as improvements with the mechanical shutter for, you know, higher speed sync. So tell us more about that, Sam, because I know this is really quite groundbreaking in camera technology.
Well, you might not be able to shoot quite as fast as 30 frames per second with a flash, but you'll still enjoy blackout-free shooting, eye autofocus, and you'll be able to shoot in a variety of situations that you've never experienced before. Due to a new dual shutter system, we have the world's fastest sync speed of 1/400th of a second, or a 500th of a second if you're shooting in APS-C mode.
Yeah, I think that's something I've seen, and there's something about the new mechanism has a carbon fiber technology with a spring technology working simultaneously together. I mean, is that correct?
Yeah, it's a really unique piece of technology, and of course, it's currently exclusive to Sony.
So I suppose that's part of the in-house technology then of lens, optics, chassis. What else is there? Shutter, and EVF and so on. So all in-house from Sony, which obviously is a huge step forward in releasing technology like this as well. Okay, my next question is then, Sam, I've seen a lot of information in communities, forums and so on, YouTube videos about the mechanical shutter. Can you tell me a little bit more, like frames per second, things like that?
Continuous shooting with mechanical shutter is 10 frames per second, so it matches our A9 Mark II.
Okay, cool, that's great. So next question around RAW. Now, I think we've now included lossless RAW. Not sure how that kind of combines together, but can you tell me a little bit about that? And we've got HEIF files and light JPEG. Obviously, that's going to improve workflow for sports photographers that may be using FTP and hardwired LAN. Can you tell us a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah, RAW's always been the best way of capturing your images. The only downside is the amount of space it takes up on your media. So with compressed RAW, you can fit more onto the same SD card. But if you're shooting in difficult lighting situations and you change the exposure with editing software by a large amount afterwards, sometimes you can see slight artifacts from the compression. It is very rare. But we've now brought along lossless compression, which means that you can still enjoy the full quality of your RAW file without using up the same amount of space.
Okay, so are there any downsides to that?
I guess the only downside is because it's compressing the RAW file, your PC or Mac needs to put a little bit extra processing power into editing because it has to decompress the RAW file as part of the editing process. But apart from that, it's a great technology.
So, of course, one of the key kind of USPs of the A9 has been the stack layered sensor, integral memory, and of course 20 frames per second blackout-free. So there's obviously some similar technology here. We haven't talked about autofocus yet. It's got a lot of coverage, and I think we've got more phase detection, contrast AF. So can you tell us a little bit more about what the autofocus on the A1 is currently set up for?
Yes, 759 phase autofocus points, and that covers 92% of the sensor. So 120 times every second that autofocus is updated will capture your subject wherever it's going.
So I know the A9 and A9 II, of course the A7 III has got an element of that technology, the autofocus and the speed, 20 frames a second, blackout-free, etc. So I know we've talked a little bit about that, but real-time IAF, animal IAF, I think there's some new improvements. Has the AI kind of improved on the Sony Alpha A1?
Yes, the autofocus has got more intelligent, and as you mentioned, the eye autofocus in particular. We've always had great human and animal eye autofocus, but now we introduce bird eye autofocus. So if you're a birder, we now have the technology to make sure you get those shots pin sharp.
Of course, taking into consideration things like crop factor, extending of telephocal length, as a sports and wildlife photographer, that's going to appeal massively. So I can't wait to see bird IAF when we get back to normality and carry out consumer workshops. So I've really started to notice, obviously looking at the news quite a lot because of what's going on in the global pandemic, etc. And I suppose being a Sony employee, I'm looking out for topical broadcasts where I can see Sony kit. And I'm seeing Sony gear, cameras, lenses more often now with reporters, broadcasts, reportage, etc., which is obviously really encouraging. So, the A1 is perfect for this.
Yeah, I've noticed it too. It's a really good point. We really, really listen to our photographers. So there are press photographers that really appreciate the fact you can attach voice tags to A9 images. This, of course, has that same capability. We have great connectivity, so if you instantly have to upload your images. We've also introduced Light JPEG. Light JPEG is smaller versions of the JPEG file, so if you're somewhere extreme with very, very limited access to data, but you need to get your shots off, you can use Light JPEG. You can also still shoot full RAW at the same time. And the camera is just an all-round performer. So if you need to shoot 8K video, it can shoot 8K video for reportage. If you need to shoot 30 frames per second, it can do that. And of course, we have dual card slots. So it really does keep your information safe.
So I know we have had some in-camera processing, but now I think I've seen that you can now crop in-camera, which can only improve workflow when you're out in the field, sports stadiums, that kind of stuff.
Yep, that's right. You can now crop in camera. So if you want to quickly edit your images and you're directly uploading to FTP, so you're not taking them out to a Mac or a PC to edit them, you can edit in camera and then fire them straight off to your agency.
So I can understand why pros, when they're at stadiums, out in the field, are going to be using the LAN port and FTP upload and so on. So how important is this to workflow, and does the A1 kind of cover those bases as well?
Yeah, you're right. There's loads of ways of uploading your pictures straight to an FTP server. There's a physical network connection. You could also do it via Wi-Fi, but there's actually a new option of connecting your camera direct to your mobile phone via a USB cable. This will allow you to achieve 10 gigabits per second upload speeds, so incredibly powerful using 5G technology.
Yeah, that's really, really good to know. I mean, when we released the A7S Mark III last year, I was, like many people, very impressed with the new menu system. Please tell me it's the same on the Sony Alpha A1.
It's almost exactly the same. One key change that we've made is that all the silent shooting options now have their own menu, so it's really easy and quick to change those settings as a group. But other than that, yeah, it's the new format of menu.
So we talked a lot about the press and the potential of the A1 being used in that kind of environment. Now, I know we get asked a lot of questions at trade shows and things like that and consumer workshops. It's about rolling shutter. So has it been improved on the A1, and if so, how?
Well, it's a brand new sensor. It's the new generation of Bion's XR processor. So I'm glad to say it's actually 1.5 times better for coping with rolling shutter using anti-distortion technology than the A9 Mark II. So it's a huge leap forwards. And when it comes to the same sort of area, when you used to get banding shooting with electronic shutter, we have our anti-flicker technology in there now as well. So you'll get almost zero situations where you can't shoot completely silently without worrying about any sort of banding or, again, rolling shutter distortion.
So obviously, being a high resolution camera, noise obviously is going to be processed really well, and at the same time, dynamic range. Now, I think we're quoting 15 plus stops. Can you comment on that, Sam?
Yeah, 15 stops plus of dynamic range, so a brand new sensor, incredible performance, the real ability to capture detail in shadows and highlights at the same time.
Thanks, Sam, for doing this. I know we haven't seen each other face to face here, and we haven't seen you for ages. But thanks for putting this together with myself and giving us an insight, really, of this new A1 Sony Alpha A1 camera that you've got. I haven't had a chance to see it yet, which is a real shame. But if it is available over the next few weeks, I'd love to be able to test it. But going forward, I mean, for me, some key messages, as we've already covered, but for me, it's really about the in-house technology that Sony have obviously put together here that you can only find in the A1, and some of the technologies also found in the rest of our range of cameras as well.
Yeah, it's something that only Sony could produce. It's a Sony sensor, it's a Sony processor, you put on the front of it Sony G Master glass, you've got fantastic optics. 30 frames per second is an incredible sort of speed to be shooting a whopping 50 megapixels. With that 50 megapixels, you can crop to APS-C, so you've got the equivalent of a 2 times teleconverter in there with still lots of resolution to play with. The video is fantastic. 8K is beyond my needs currently, but it's a great option to have. You've got 4K video in there, and you've got 4K video at high frame rates. And I've recently switched all my workflow to 4K, so if I'm outputting in high definition, I can use those extra crops to change the angle to make it look like a different scene. You've got the great OLED viewfinder on the back of it. They're the world's leading viewfinder now with the highest refresh rate and fantastic resolution. We've still got the touchscreen. There's so many features that are just packed into this camera, and they're Sony technologies, so I don't think you're going to find this anywhere other than the Sony A1. It's an incredible piece of kit.
Sam, thanks ever so much. Great to see you, and virtually, but hopefully I'll see you again soon.
It's been a pleasure, Mark. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate you listening to me blather on about a camera I'm really excited about. Thanks.
So again, big thanks to Sam Pilling there for supporting us in his first thoughts and looks at the Sony Alpha A1. For more information, you can find out on our website, which is www.sony.co.uk. All the best.